Welcome back, everybody, to another episode 23 of Sabres Chat. I am Luka, of course. This is presented by Built in Buffalo. Since last episode, which was 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks and a day, as this is dropping Friday morning, the Sabres have been one thing. And the title of this episode, the title of my feelings on the Sabres season so far, I guess, all correlates right here. And it's a roller coaster. This is an absolute roller coaster. Buckle up because I feel like this is kind of what we're going to see from the Sabres, both what we have seen, and then what we will continue to see. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on in the episode when I talk about kind of more of what's coming up and my thoughts on what's coming up for this team. But since the last show, the Sabres have been 3-3-1 in that 2 week stretch, and alternating wins and losses that entire way. It started with the loss up in Winnipeg. Feels like forever ago at this point, but that was the first game after my last show, where they lost up there. Then they, not to recap these games, but then went to Chicago. They started this mini road trip, had one home game, and then been on a road trip themselves. So at Winnipeg, a loss, went to Chicago and won, went to Washington and lost kind of a tough one in overtime there. Come home, have a really nice comeback win against Pittsburgh, down 2-0 in going into the third period, score 3 unanswered. A beautiful game on Black Friday. Then kind of have the letdown the day after in New Jersey with an absolute thumping 7-2. Go into Madison Square Garden with, in my opinion at least, very low expectations of anything positive coming out of that. And I think that was a season-defining win in Madison Square Garden for multiple reasons, which I'll get into in a second, of course. And not that it should be news to anyone, but they go into Madison Square Garden, put in a great effort for 60 minutes and get a 5-1 win. And then just tonight, as I'm recording this on Thursday night, they lose in St. Louis in a 6-4 kind of crazy shootout game, although the Sabres heavily outshot the Blues. Just feels like, especially early on, they couldn't really find the back of the net for whatever reason. Just a tough one. And then also had plenty of giveaways and errors that were just, unfortunately, not too surprising at this point in time. You just want to see them clean it up eventually. But at this point, it's just not being cleaned up. You're not seeing team defense, and you see exactly the result that was tonight in a 6-4 loss against the Blues. But it's the one positive out of all of this, right? Out of this entire roller coaster, through its ups and downs, is that the scoring has still been there, even with the Tage injury, which last episode was kind of is there still hope kind of feeling, because things weren't going great at that point in time. Tage then gets hurt for and it's already known that he'll be out for a significant amount of time. You really start to question then there what, you're gonna have to lean heavily on Skinner. You're going to have to hope Tuck at that point 2 weeks ago can really turn things around, which he somewhat has. He's definitely found the back of the net a few times. But where else is the scoring going to come from? It doesn't feel great, things of that nature. And yet there has been kind of an overall depth in scoring in a little bit of ways. We've seen in that comeback win against the Penguins, Gergensons was one of the goals. Things like that is happening right now when you don't have your ace in Tage Thompson in the lineup for the foreseeable future. And that's great. So that's one positive of this past 2 weeks. And I feel like I'm going to start to do this every episode now, where since I'm doing it bi-weekly and I can recap kind of a 2 week span, can talk a little bit more about kind of what's been good, what's been not good, and or just kind of what's all been good or what's all been bad. But one positive is definitely that scoring has still been there. I mean, even tonight, you lose 6-4. The shots were aplenty. You still found 4 goals. You found one in an empty net where it kind of gave you a little bit of hope with 2.5 minutes left or so. It's still there. They can find ways to put pucks in the back of the net, even without their ace, that is Tage Thompson. The negative, though, kind of is a counteractive to that. And the reason they found themselves in a 6-4 game, the reason they got thumped in New Jersey 7-2, there is still just an absolute abysmal defensive effort out of all skaters. It's not just defensemen, it's all skaters across the board. Team defense still continues to not exist with this team. And it's just getting to a point where it's frustration, of course, but we're somewhere now where it's just, is it ever going to be learned? Is the only way that we will see this roster, this lineup put together kind of a defensive effort consistently with different coaching, with different mentoring, whatever you want to call it. Like is Granado and the coaching staff and the individuals involved when it comes to just telling this, each line what their jobs are and their roles are and what they need to accomplish. Like, is it just being completely ignored at this point? That's where my head goes, at least, because the Rangers game was kind of an outlier in that 5-1 dominant win against the best team at that time, and probably still at this point in time in the league, the Rangers at their barn. That was the best all around defensive effort we had seen among these past 2 weeks. And realistically, since the end of October, when they had that 4-0 win against Colorado. And even then, Colorado was kind of just off a little bit that night. It was still a very, very good game by the Sabres, but still felt like one where the Avalanche were a little bit off too, and it just compounded for them. But when you can count on one hand how many times the Sabres have really put together that full team defensive effort, it's not good. And these past 2 weeks have not been there at all. But speaking of that Rangers game, other things that have happened since this last show and topics that I want to go over, of course, the biggest one is, it definitely, since that Rangers game, seems, of course, that the net and the keys to the net have officially been handed over to UPL. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen has officially been named the number one goaltender for this Sabres team. And that was done so by also the announcement that Devin Levi was sent down to the AHL and sent down to Rochester to play for the Amherst. It was probably the best thing to have happen when it comes to the goaltending of this team at this point in time for this season. It's great for Levi. Levi went in with, of course, such high expectations this year, but there was still question marks around, he's still young. This is going to be his first full season in pro hockey altogether, let alone the NHL. And it definitely felt like, even though you saw those flashes of what you hoped to get out of Levi night in, night out, and what he can grow on and what he can be potentially for this team for years to come, you saw way too many, a ton of rookie mistakes happening on a regular basis, night in, night out. Every game, there was always that kind of, maybe off positioning, over committing to kind of puck, wherever puck positioning is in the offensive zone or defensive zone in our sake, so on and so forth. It was just, it seemed like the game could not slow down for him. And he found himself in bad positions or just putting himself into awkward positions that ultimately were letting the team down and letting pucks in the net. Not entirely on him, but he wasn't helping his own case, right? And it definitely feels like, of course, him moving to the AHL, him going down and still getting pro experience, but at the AHL level, will be perfect to kind of season him, get him more accustomed at a easier pace, we'll call it, when it comes to the pro schedule, and just really develop him and fine tune him for hopefully the bright years that are still there ahead for Devin Levi. For the team's sake now, with this point, we go to the other side, the flip side. That performance we saw in New York out of UPL was phenomenal. And that clearly was kind of the last straw that needed to be drawn for Kevin Adams, Granado, and everyone involved in this decision to say, hey, we're just going to go with UPL at this point. You can't have a 3 goaltender rotation. It's not good for the roster, let alone good for the players that are your goaltenders. Constantly you're going to be scratching a goaltender and they're going to be questioning if they'll ever see the net again. Eric Comrie can live in that backup role. He is, what he is essentially, but he is a backup in this league. He's a pro's pro as well. And clearly from, reports, I've said it before in previous episodes, going even back to last season, there's something that he's liked around the locker room where that's value for the team, especially in a backup goaltender where realistically you're probably getting 20 to 20 is a little light. This isn't, 2006. You're probably going to get like 25, 30 games out of him, right? That's what you're really you would hope, because you have a secured number one, which it seems like now finally that is potentially going to be UPL, barring injuries, of course, and everything of that nature. But Eric Comrie's your backup. UPL's your guy. He showed that he can play great in big games. I will say this. He really let us down in St. Louis tonight. The Jordan Kyrou goal, on one hand, again, talked about it earlier, bad team defense. Just things that you're seeing skaters for the Sabres just not doing the simplest of things, man marking well, anything of that nature. It's not great. On top of that, though, the Jordan Kyrou goal, there is cutting off the angle for a shot opportunity to a skater. And then there is just losing complete track of where you are on the ice as you continue to do so. And I would love to know what was going through UPL's head. I'm sure they talked to him afterwards, potentially. I'm not sure. I didn't hear any of these post-game comments, but I imagine the moment that Kyrou passes that puck back towards the middle of the zone for essentially a wide open net and easy tap in for the St. Louis to then go up. I don't know if that was the 4-3 goal or the 5-3 goal. Regardless, just as the Sabres had tied it up, then all of a sudden this little surge happens from the Blues. And that goal to me was like, okay, this is why UPL still is rough around the edges, because I feel like whereas Levi was showing these rookie mistakes and these young, inexperienced mistakes on a somewhat regular basis, UPL still has those, but it's not quite as regular. And that was one of them in my eyes. Like eventually you have to recognize where you are on the ice, where Kyrou is going with the puck on the ice. He's cutting so far over on the zone that you have essentially abandoned your post. You've abandoned your crease, and something's bound to be there, and you have no ability to get back in a decent position at all. And he's not someone that that any of us, I believe, see as a kind of quick mobile goaltender where even on his best day he'd be flying back into that position with how far out he was. It was clearly kind of lost track of what the heck was going on, and that would like to see those clean up. But overall, I'm happy that he got handed the keys to the net. I'm happy he's going to be the number one moving forward, because for this team, just having that number one that they know is going to be leaned on moving forward and relied upon, and you won't see a constant rotation in that net moving forward, I think is great for the team overall, for the goaltenders, for the coaching staff, for the players that are skating in front of them. I think it's all positives. I think this move for Levi and his development is great. And then for the team in this season is good as well. Another thing that happened since last I was recording, two other players made their NHL debuts. Highly known names, Yuri Kulich and Isaac Rosen, both made their NHL debuts late last week in that game at New Jersey. Kind of a forgettable game, of course. The real thing I'll only remember from that game is the fact that Kulich and Rosen made their debuts in this game. Within the thumping that was that Devils game, they had around 14 and 13 minutes respectively between Kulich and Rosen. Neither recorded a point. Kulich finished with a -1. Kulich was a -2, and no, I'm pretty sure it was Kulich -1, and then Rosen -2. I wrote my notes. I wrote Kulich twice. My apologies. Kulich was a -1, Rosen was a -2, and then out of this, we've seen Rosen in the lineup now for these past two games as well, whereas Kulich was then eventually sent back down to Rochester with Jordan Greenway coming back after being on a hiatus for a little bit there. just due to, I believe it was reported personal reasons, whatever it is. Hopefully everything's okay with him in his life. But, he needed to step away. They went with the 7 defenseman look in New York and then went back to your traditional 6 defensemen and 4 lines of forwards tonight in St. Louis. Minutes went down as well for Rosen for what it's worth. Rosen finds himself on a line with Tyson Yost and whatnot. So it's kind of just filling a role for this team as they need skaters. Of course, injuries have piled up a bit for this roster. So it's good to see these guys get their debuts, still searching for their first NHL points respectively as well. But just a fun little note to see those guys come up, finally kind of wear the blue and gold and see what they got at this NHL level. Considering that we've kind of been wondering why they weren't called up sooner. You saw your Brandon Biro, whatever it is. We've seen Lucas Rusek get called up. Things like that are happening. And you're like, okay, then why aren't we giving these guys a look? Now they did. I don't think there was really anything of to note with their games in particular. I think they showed flash of kind of their youth and hunger to move the puck around and get pucks on net. But then as well, you also saw moments where clearly it's they have room to develop and room to grow in the pro game, and that's not a bad thing, right? It's just expected, and that's okay. Um, Another young guy though, that is, man, I'm just realizing right now the way I wrote my notes unintentionally have kind of a good flow to them. Although as I say this, I am breaking that flow. Another young guy on this team that has been playing far from like he is a young stallion, a young 18-year-old on the roster. Another thing that happened in these past 2 weeks, Zach Benson, officially a full-time Sabre now. He played his 10th game this past week and more since, of course. This was a no-brainer. This is of this list of notes that I made, and this is the final kind of what has happened since. Of the list of things that have happened since last episode, this was the most no-brainer. Even though he got the injury, it was kind of rehab, get back to full health, and then realistically, as long as nothing looked off, you're like, okay, you're going. Like if something looked off when it came to maybe he wasn't fully healthy and, I don't even know a world where you would have sent him back down to juniors, to be quite frank. It just might have delayed the inevitable of getting his 10th game. But prior to the injury, Zach Benson was one of, if not questionably, the best forward two-way, especially for this roster prior to the injury. Since coming back from the injury, that has not changed. Zach Benson is playing every night like he is a multi-year experienced forward in the National Hockey League. His hockey IQ is off the chart. Like you hear that all the time, but it is truly off the charts when you watch him. His understanding of where opportunities are on the ice, where the puck needs to be in order to create opportunities, and then also just where to then go to then capitalize on opportunities. That is awesome. Even little things, it might look minuscule to some and stuff like that, but what made even his goal in St. Louis tonight awesome, he attacked the puck off the draw. I'm sure this was somewhat by design, of course, but he attacked the puck off the draw from Dylan Cousins at the dot, and then essentially his back to the net, just understanding that if he can get something off on net as quick as possible, there is potential that he can catch Binnington between the pipes off guard. And he quite literally did that while also then just keeping it on the ice, because the hardest thing to do, of course, for a goaltender, especially in the unexpected, when they are in their typical upright position, is get down as quick as possible. If they don't have clear sight of the puck, they don't see where it's coming from until, it's already off and going. That is a tough puck to stop underneath with your pads. So just little things, little detail understandings of what to do when and where, and just how to execute those things. Zach Benson has been phenomenal for this roster. He is a full-time Sabre moving forward. He is a key guy for this team. And even when Tage was healthy, he was still one of, if not the best overall forward for this team. And I don't see how that slows down anytime soon. He may hit kind of that rookie wall when he starts playing more games than he's used to, especially as the schedule continues to go with the condensed kind of feel that it is in the NHL. But I think he's a phenomenal talent, just a phenomenal player for this organization. And it's what a gem to get him in the first round. Like almost, it was weird in my mind. I knew he was a very good player, and I liked him a good amount coming into this past year's draft. Um, but even then, it felt like it's a great player that you're drafting because he also has familiarity with a key piece in the organization that is Matt Savoy. And you're like, oh, well, you're getting his buddy in too. It's an added bonus. That'll be fun. Maybe they can even continue the chemistry they've already built in the junior ranks, in the pro ranks, excuse me, everything like that. And all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, this Zach Benson guy is legitimate and he's ready to go right from day one. And it's a nice surprise that once the roster gets healthier once again, of course with Tage, but then also let's never forget about Jack Quinn, and players can start falling where they are. And all of a sudden your Zach Benson becomes that third line winger that we've talked about in the past. How do we get around this Victor Olofsson thing? And who can the Sabres bring in to improve and stuff like that? Somehow they found themselves where the first round pick of just this past draft has legitimately become that answer. And now you can essentially line things up at full health where you have your Tage Tuck Skinner, you have your kids line. I would imagine Quinn will slide in there, but who knows? But you have, Cousins centering then, um, Perturka and Quinn, and get that chemistry going again. And then your third line becomes, oh, sorry, Casey Middlestat, Zach Benson, and Jordan Greenway. Love everything about that entire top nine. That is a top nine to me that can really do some great things. And I think, and even if you need to shuffle a thing around or two, and you slide Benson up, you bring Quinn down, you bring Tuck down to bring some more physicality with Greenway and Middlestat, to then slide Benson up to that top line to just to continue to add a little bit of grip of some speed and skill. Not that Tuck doesn't have speed in his own right and everything like that. He's a phenomenal power forward in the NHL, but with unbelievable skating. But you bring up Benson to create a little bit of a different look at that top line with your Skinner and Tage, things like that, which was working so well, by the way, in preseason, and even early on and stuff when they've shown it. So it's one of those things where Zach Benson has just been this unexpected gem for the organization. And I'm so happy that Kevin Adams, the organization, Granato, everyone, they didn't fall into this weird trap that you sometimes see those inexperienced, or I don't want to call them losing organizations, but just organizations that don't exactly understand what they have all the time because they're not used to being in the position that they are when they have this young, unexpected talent that's just good. And it's like, well, we still need to develop. We want to grow the organization top and bottom. We need to let players grow at a at the usual pace, right? At the well, normally in this circumstance, an 18-year-old that was just freshly drafted, they can show flashes in the NHL, but let's bring them back down to send them back down to juniors, let them continue to just be comfortable, develop. And then eventually we'll get him on that pro contract. We'll get him in the AHL. He can then grow there and stuff like that. Even if they show you a lot of flash like this, Zach Benson has been far and away higher than anyone could have expected. I will call anyone a liar, to be quite frank. If you truly believed you were going to get, before the season started, you were going to get what we are seeing right now. I cannot believe there's a single soul out there that expected this, other than Benson's family and parents. Like, I'll give it to Benson's family. If they said that, I'll buy it. Whether that's them more blowing smoke about the situation or whatever it is, so be it. But that would be the only case. It's awesome. It's an awesome place to be. when it comes to that. And as I said, once we get back to full health, once the Sabres get back to full health and everything starts falling as it may, it's exciting to think about what they need to do. And then they can kind of really go back to focusing on shoring up the blue line maybe a little bit more, and then maybe preaching a little bit more team defense. That would be nice as well with a full squad and seeing where things can go from there. Those are the few things. And real quick too on Zach Benson, actually, I didn't even write this down, but just popped in my head. There has been where, the Canadian Hockey Association, whatever they are, they're requesting if Zach Benson will be available for the World Juniors. And of course that would pull him away from the Sabres and everything like that. There is no world that I expect Kevin Adams to let Zach Benson go and compete in the World Juniors. I would be shocked. He is way too valuable to this roster. Way too valuable. And with at that point, you would hope Jack Quinn is either playing or very close to playing, since it's normally early to mid January that I do believe World Juniors occurs. I would hope Quinn's back. We've heard about December, and we're obviously coming up right on that. This episode dropped on December 1st, of course, but um, we'll see how Quinn's thing is going, but even with that, and then Tage, of course, like this roster needs Zach Benson. Like it just does. It ticks better with him in the lineup. We saw when he was injured and he was out for those few games and you're filling his role elsewhere, it just didn't feel the same. And that's how you know you have something really special. No matter the age of the player. You have a quality player for that team when he's out. It is a clear and obvious thing that you are missing him. Like Tage Thompson is still clearly, obviously missed. You watch the power play, which hadn't even been good when he was, still healthy and everything. There were issues there, but even then, you watch it without the threat of Tage Thompson out there on the left side of the power play, and it feels like it's even more difficult to find space on the power play and everything like that. Like you're not finding more open space on that right side right now, and it's even tougher. That's why you see Darlene collapsing in a lot more central spaces, things of that nature, and they're figuring out a way to still create some goals on the power play, but it's a struggle. You just know when you miss him on the ice, that's a good player. Zach Benson is one of those guys. So those are all the few things I kind of wanted to talk about that have happened since the last episode a couple weeks ago. What's coming up for this team? A lot of road games were this past November, of course. It was a very road driven November. We then have a stretch of games coming up until the next episode of Sabres Chat, where we will finish up this current road trip, although they've been back back home. They've been back in Buffalo for practice purposes and just, comfortable stay. But I imagine they're staying down that way this time around. I don't know why you would go from St. Louis to Buffalo to then Carolina. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. But they will be wrapping up this kind of road trip, this 4-game road trip at Carolina Saturday. Then the day after, they come home finally to play some home games in this next upcoming weeks against Nashville. A couple days later, we'll be at home against Detroit. Then they go to Boston, a couple more home games with Montreal and Arizona. And then I will be recording just after the Colorado game on Wednesday the 13th, a late game on TNT. That will be an interesting one for sure. The one thing I'll say about this upcoming schedule for the next 2 weeks is I don't expect this roller coaster to stop anytime soon. You look at the teams and on paper and stuff. Carolina, obviously a very good team. Nashville, I think they're a good team. I don't think Nashville's a bad team. I think they're a little bit up and down themselves, but they are what they are. Detroit, with now Patty Kane, of course. That'll be interesting. Dylan Larkin's been out for the past couple games for them. I imagine he could potentially be back because I don't think it was anything too serious. But Detroit is kind of one of those wild card-ish teams. You go to Boston, of course, that's a very tough game. Then you come home, a tough and physical Montreal team, and then it shouldn't be as surprising as it is, but still surprisingly decent Arizona team there. You would like this Sabres team to be able to win, let's say, at least 3 of those games. And in my mind, that is Detroit, Montreal, and Arizona. Nashville is a true coin flip in my mind. Um, Carolina and Boston, you take one of those, that'd be awesome. You lose both of those. Hopefully, one of those is in overtime. Obviously, 1 point's better than no points. Would I be shocked if they lose both of those games? No. At Colorado, I fully expect to lose that game. And I don't mean that in such a like we're crap way. It's just a couple things. Colorado is a very, very good team, of course. And I mentioned earlier in the show, there was that 4-0 game where Colorado may have not had their A game. They may have not been at their best when we played them and we kind of shut them down completely. Lukanen had a great game that day. I would expect them to kind of, it's not like they're pissed off about it and have it circled because of anger reasons, but at the same time, that seems like one of those kinds of games where going into it, now I don't know what Colorado's schedule is. Maybe they have a game the night before and it's a little bit more difficult, but going into it, especially if there's let's just say, a skate the day before, the coach is going to be reminding every one of those players about the 4-0 loss in Buffalo early in the season. And Colorado at home, tough barn, great team, motivated to correct a wrong earlier in the season in a 4-0 loss to a Sabres team that, regardless on how you feel about the Sabres are not a Colorado Avalanche team, of course. So an inferior team. I would expect to lose that. So if we truly go down this list, right? And this past stretch, it's been 3-3-1. And I say this roller coaster ain't going to change. If we lose the games, I expect us to lose at Carolina, at Boston, at Colorado. That's 3 losses. Hopefully you take one of those in overtime, but let's just assume they're all regulation because those are very tough barns against very tough opponents. You win the 3 games, you should hopefully win all home games versus Detroit, versus Montreal, versus Arizona. You win those 3 games, and then you have that true coin flip in Nashville in my eyes. Being at home, I'd like to see them win that game, but let's see. It'll be a light barn. I know when I looked at ticket availability and stuff like that, because it is on a football Sunday coming up. It is the Bills bye week, of course, but also football in the NFL dominates everyone's sports mind. So I don't think you're going to see a whole heck of a lot of fans. That will be a more empty one. Kind of you'll think it's a Monday looking at the audience, in my opinion. And even then, it might even be lighter than that. So that'll be an interesting one. That'll be a true coin flip in my eyes. If you can win that game and go 4-3, let's say in this stretch, I'm okay with that. And I think that brings up my final question here, my final point, right? We're talking about this continuing to be a roller coaster. Is this necessarily a bad thing to be a roller coaster right now? Is this bad? Should the Sabres just not be able to find and string together a bunch of wins? You want them to, of course. You at some point or another, if this team wants to make the playoffs, you need to be able to string together wins one after the next. You have to. That's just the nature of the beast. But, and what I will say is this: they haven't lost grip on the season yet. And this is a point, especially last year, where we saw this exact team lose grip on the season, string together a bunch of losses, 8 consecutive losses already at this point in time, I do believe, last year. I think that was all in just the month of November. So they lost 8 games in a row, and they were just constantly trying to dig themselves out of that hole ever since. And it took them months to do so, because as hard as it can be to string together wins, it's almost easy to string together losses, and you can let kind of bad things continue to, pile up. And what I'll expand on is kind of like, you have that letdown in New Jersey, the 7-2. Absolutely, you got played out of that barn before it was even the third period. And then you go to New York to play the best team in the league at that moment in time in their barn. That is a place where you could easily understand, you don't want to see it, but you could easily understand seeing that team kind of after, if they let in an early goal, all of a sudden going, man, it's just not working out right now. And then that becomes a loss. Now you're at 2 in a row. Then you go to St. Louis. In St. Louis, say the game played out exactly how it did, and it was just chaotic. And even when you got it tied, all of a sudden they scored again. Game gets a little bit out of hand. Next thing you know, you lost 6-4. That's 3 losses in a row. Now you go into Carolina. This team always struggles against Carolina. They played very well against Carolina last time out in the same situation at Carolina. Let's see how they play again. Can they put that effort together? I think if they were coming off of 3 straight losses and 3 straight thumpings, I don't know. That would be tough. And now all of a sudden you're at 4 losses. You get to finally come home and play Nashville and Detroit, but you're off in L4 and you're really starting to feel the heat. I think there'll be a lot of pressure coming from the outside in on this team if that were to have been the case. Instead, they captured that win in New York, which was huge. So it made this St. Louis loss a little disappointing, but you still have that expectation or hope that it's like they can still turn things around. They still understand how to then turn things around. Whereas last year and years past, that just wasn't the case. They did have that stretch earlier this year where they had an L3 at Pittsburgh for nothing. At home against Boston the night after the Denver Bills Monday night fiasco, lose 5-2 on Kyle Oposo's 1000th game. And then you go to Winnipeg and you lose a tough game 3-2. Comrie led in a week 1 in there, but it was a tough fought 3-2 loss. You didn't let that compound then in a game you knew you should win when you went to Chicago. You took care of business and you won. You kind of let one slip away in Washington. You come back. Things feel like they're slipping away. You come back 3 unanswered. You win 3-2 in regulation against Pittsburgh. Like this team, as much of a roller coaster as they are, they're at least still finding level. They're still not letting things get out of hand. They're not hitting that big downhill dip, right? They're still figuring that out. So in these next 2 weeks of games, if they can just continue that roller coaster, I mentioned it before, you have players that are going to eventually come back for this team that will hopefully help improve this team and hopefully improve the consistency level that they can get out of this team, where then maybe they can start stacking together wins. Jack Quinn lines back up on the kids line. Tage Thompson comes back and continues to be the dominant player he is. There are all these things that can happen. Next thing you know, you go into the trade deadline, you're still really flirting around with that playoff line. Maybe you're even flirting around with that, third spot in the division. Who knows where that will be by the trade deadline time? And maybe you make a push for a little bit of a blue line change to boost it up a little bit more. Maybe you figure out kind of how to bring a little bit of scoring while still maintaining grit to that fourth line. Whatever is needed, right? Whatever you feel is needed that you can truly get to that next level, break through that playoff kind of barrier there and just finish the job. And it's all thanks to this stretch of the season right now where this team has not let things get off the rails. They are continuing to just grind it out, figure out ways to win, especially when they are coming off of results in games like the New Jersey and this St. Louis game, where it just didn't feel like things could go their way. They're not letting that compound. They're not letting that just build on losses throughout the season. Hopefully we do not see that. Hopefully, they can be competitive in Carolina. Like I said, I'm not exactly expecting them to win that game. I would love to see it always, but don't let these losses compound, build up on each other. Next thing you know, you're on an L6 and L8 like you were last year, and you're now going into the new calendar year still understanding you're in a bit of a hole and you need to dig yourself out and very quick, or else the hopes of playoffs that this dressing room clearly has and of course fans have the expectations of will just get away from them before the next thing they know. So I'm okay with it. I don't think the roller coaster thing is too much of a concern. It is what it is with this team, to be quite honest. I'm not saying it's acceptable either, and it's not like kind of what they need to do. Eventually, you would like to find them, like them to figure out a consistent way to play and a way to also play some team defense. But overall, I'm not going to complain, especially considering the alternative that is them kind of getting behind the 8 ball, letting losses stack up, and the season getting away from them early on. And it just feels like kind of a forever hope that they can get out of it. But the reality sets in as the season gets to the tail end that what happened earlier on with things getting awry has cost them in the end, and that is no good. So I appreciate anyone that's stuck around, listen to me. You know, I still believe in the Sabres team. I still believe that there's hope in this season. Um, there have been bright spots. We of course have injuries. A bunch of players had career years last season. There's a natural regression to that. You just want to kind of hopefully find steady water on that and it doesn't go too down south. But thank you for listening. If you like everything you hear and stuff of that nature, please be sure to subscribe to this channel. Like I've mentioned early in the podcast, this is a bi-weekly podcast now, and I just have fun kind of talking Sabres hockey to all that like to hear it. Leave a comment on all your thoughts, stuff of that nature. I love to try to reply. I check in every once in a while on the YouTube comments to see apologies, what you have to say. And I love talking Sabres hockey always. If you want to find me on Twitter, you can see me right there at Sabres Chat Pod. That is my Twitter account for this particular thing. You can also find me and my co-host of all our Bills content at Bills Chat Pod, the father pod for everything we do. That's where all our main content is driven from. Be sure to give us a follow on either or, you know, comment on what we like to do. We like to provide you all the updates and everything like that. I try to do my best with Sabre stuff. It's a little bit more difficult. I don't live in the Twitter world nearly as much as my co-host Josh does with our Bill stuff, but I try to do my best and everything like that. I love interaction. I love talking Sabres hockey with all. So if you enjoy it yourself, be sure to follow on Twitter, subscribe here, everything of that nature. I hope everyone has a great day or evening or morning or whenever you decided to enjoy this content. And I will be back in a couple weeks with another episode of Sabres Chat presented by Built in Buffalo. My name is Luka. You all have a great rest of your day.